COVID-19 impacts on affordable housing by Void Star Turkey in Turkey. About us, we're Void Star Turkey in Turkey. We're comprised of three computer science roommates in data science. Myself, I'm Jonas Stegman.
I'm Kaylee Bigelow.
And I'm Evan Switzer.
We also have special guests helping us today. We have MethodBot, who you can see throughout the slides, and also Findings Chicken, who will help explain some of our data and graphs. So the social justice issue that we chose was how to investigate COVID-19 impacts on low-income housing groups and access to affordable housing in Canada between January 2010 to October 2020. We chose this 10-year gap just to see, make sure that we got rid of all outliers that could happen and actually make sure the trends that we're seeing are actual real trends and how we can better predict what will happen during COVID, as we don't always have COVID data. So for question one, how has COVID-19 changed the amount of Canadians who meet the requirement for affordable housing in Canada? We used government data from our core housing needs census of 2016, which can be found on Statistics Canada. We also use the CMHC data sets, which stands for Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. This is also another government agency that tracks housing needs and such. So the method we used for this question was just a descriptive comparison between COVID-19 cases and how many Canadians are in core housing needs. However, we weren't actually able to do this because we don't have the data for 2020. We only have the data up to 2016, which can be seen in the graph here. So for our findings, we graphed data between 1991 to 2016, which is a little bit outside of our 10-year range. But we did this because we don't have the latest data, just because it's not available yet. But from this graph, we can see that each province has an independent trend from each other based on the need for core housing in them over time. This also dictates to us that you can't look at Canada as a whole when you compare core housing need, especially when it should come with COVID, as we don't expect the trends to really change that much.
So for question two, the question that we asked was how has COVID affected evictions and job loss in Canada for 2020? Our data came from three places. From Stats Canada, we got the unemployment rate by province and for all of Canada. For the COVID cases, we got that from the Government of Canada website, and then we also calculated a COVID rate based off that. And then we got in the times of eviction freeze for each province from their provincial website. The method we used for this was multiple linear regression. Multiple linear regression is showing a correlation between a scalar variable and two or more explanatory variables. So we wanted to see if unemployment rate was related to the total number of COVID-19 cases with a factor of an eviction freeze. Our first set of graphs here just show us the unemployment rate over this current year, starting in January, going to October for each province. We have British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec as our first group, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan as our second group, and the Maritime provinces as the third group. As you can see, around April, May, everyone usually ends up going higher as COVID hits and then starts to settle back down. Our second graph is just the total number of COVID cases in Canada, just to show that the spike for April, May does happen and it affects every province. And then it calms down again, and then there's another spike, which brings me to our eviction freeze and the end of eviction freeze, where every province except for Newfoundland and Labrador starts in April and ends sometime around the summer, and Newfoundland and Labrador just don't have an eviction freeze ever. So what we found based off this data is we calculated the linear regression between unemployment rate and eviction freeze in COVID cases. And we found COVID cases don't actually affect our unemployment rate that much, which, looking at it, makes sense as COVID cases keep going up, but our unemployment rate has gone back down. But eviction freeze happens at the start of COVID cases, which is when the unemployment rate spikes. So it would make sense that there is a correlation there somewhere. We also did things like tried with the rate of COVID cases, and that still had no effect on the unemployment rate.
For our third question, we wanted to know, how has the low-income communities in Canada been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of cost of living and income? We are using data from Statistics Canada, their tables about household spending and distribution of total income by census family type. So the method we are using here is linear regression. We want to show the interaction between income and household spending, and we are going to be comparing the relationship, and we wanted to see if it was linear. We will be using the assumptions that there is a relationship existing and the data is normally distributed. So our first graph here shows 4 grouping amounts. 3 of them are household groups, and the last one is average total expenditure. The 3 household groups we'll be representing are coupled families, lone parent households, and groups that do not fall under one of the first 2 categories. This graph will help us predict what the 2020 data should have been if COVID did not happen. When the data is released for 2020, we can plot this data and see how the income changed for each of these groups due to the pandemic. For our second graph, we show the linear regression between each of these groups' total income compared to the average total expenditure for a household. For running linear regression on each of these, we received a small p-value for all 3 relationships. This means that we accept that income and total expenditure are linearly related for each of these 3 groups. This will help us see how COVID-19 has affected what the predicted outcome should have been. One way we expect the pandemic to affect the relationship is that expenditure will not decrease. However, due to layoffs, job loss, and other factors, that household income will decrease for 2020. Our fourth question is, how has the creation of affordable housing in Ontario been affected by COVID-19? More specifically, we want to know, has there been more, less, or the same amount of affordable housing creation? The data we'll be using comes from the Government of Ontario website. It's just showing what their investment in affordable housing annual income report is, and we got our data from here. We will also be using linear regression on this data. We want to show how COVID-19 has impacted the creation of affordable housing compared to the households no longer in housing need because they no longer fit into that 30% household income bracket. Our first graph, we found data up to 2019. It appeared that while many people move out of the affordable housing bracket, the Government of Ontario is not creating nearly as much affordable housing. When we have the COVID-19 data, we expect the number of households that leave affordable housing will be much lower, and so will the number of houses created by the government. In our second graph, we show the relationship between those leaving affordable housing due to affordable housing working and how many more units were created by the Ontario government. We thought that we would see a trend as the government saw affordable housing working, but this was not the case. The p-value, as shown on this graph, allows us to reject the fact that rental unit creation is linearly related to households leaving affordable housing.
So overall, we basically analyzed a whole bunch of data, but we didn't really have enough data to sufficiently inform us whether or not COVID-19 has actually had an effect on affordable housing. This is mostly because the data wasn't there. In future, when the data becomes available, we hope to get a better answer to how our questionings could be answered and how COVID-19 actually does affect affordable housing in Canada and in each province. Thank you.